Hello, everyone. This is my systematic review on the impact of plant-based diets on athletic performance. I first became interested in this topic actually a long time before I took this class. Back in 2019, I was training for a long distance race and came across a documentary on Netflix called The Game Changers. It was highly plant-based, pro-vegan, really. And but however, since then it has come under fire for cherry picking results, and that its data may have been skewed to promote a certain platform, meaning veganism. So it got me wondering, what did the data actually say about plant-based diets due to their rise in popularity? So if you want to follow along with me, I hope that you will enjoy the presentation you're about to see. Sorry. Having an issue here with my PowerPoint. Okay, sorry, slight issue with the technology. Okay, so getting started off, you're going to need to know first, what is a plant-based diet? There's a couple of different definitions that I was able to find. The first one consisted of a diet that is wholly reliant upon plant-based foods and does not include any animal products whatsoever. It excludes all meat, it excludes dairy, it excludes fish, it excludes eggs. Anything that came from an animal or even touched an animal or got breathed on by an animal was not included in this diet. However, I was able to find a more lenient definition as well of a diet that would mainly include meat, but could include some variety of animal products. And I'll discuss those different varieties on the subsequent slide here. However, it did want to say that those who adhered to a plant-based diet would focus on incorporating whole, minimally processed foods into their diets versus something that was highly processed, that had been frozen a lot of times, or that came in a box or in packaging of certain variety. I wanted to focus on whole, fresh, plant-based foods. The foods that would typically be seen to be included in a plant-based diet would be a lot of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes and beans, which would be the primary protein source that you would be getting for those plant-based diets. And then in addition, nuts, seeds, and oils with a lot of healthy fats in there. Again, with my technology, give me a second here. Right, so here are the different variety of plant-based diets that I mentioned to you guys on the previous slide. I wanted to set up a table here so you could get a visual idea of what kinds of foods would be included in each individual subtype. First of all, across the top, there is omnivorous, meaning it includes all variety of food types: meat, fish, poultry, dairy, eggs, and plant-based foods. Going down from there, there is a lessening of how much animal products would be included in each individual diet. A flexitarian, if you have never heard of them before, will occasionally include animal-based products. However, it is not a they do tend to emphasize more plant-based products versus their animal products. A lacto-ovo vegetarian includes plant-based products, but will include both dairy and eggs in their diet. A lacto-vegetarian will do dairy, but not eggs. An ovo-vegetarian is just the opposite, will do eggs, but not dairy. And then a pescatarian may include fish in their diet, though they would not do red meat and poultry. And it also should be noted that whether or not they include dairy and eggs in their diet is a personal choice, is a personal preference. There may be some who do include those items in their diet and others who do not. And then lastly, down there at the very, very bottom, you'll see that there is the vegans, and those are the people who are entirely plant-based and include no variety of animal products whatsoever. There's even some variety of vegans out there who will not include honey in their diet because it's coming from bees, obviously animals, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. Okay, so we've covered what is a plant-based diet and a couple of the different varieties that you can see. And now we're looking at my key feature of, the relationship between plant-based diets and sports. The history of plant-based diets can be traced way, way back in human existence, all the way to back when we were hunter-gatherers. We did tend to rely more on plants than meat at that point in time. But the first instance of it in relation to sports was traced to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. To be qualified as an Olympic athlete in those days in ancient Greece, they were only able to eat plant-based foods. No animal-based products were allowed. In the Roman Empire, gladiators who were considered to be the sports heroes of the day would be considered to kind of be on the level of an elite athlete of today's world. They did tests on the bones of the gladiators and found that they had a very high strontium content. Now, strontium is more concentrated in plant foods, and people who ate more plant-based foods would have seen a higher strontium content. Therefore, they deducted that gladiators were eating a primarily plant-based diet. In that same time frame, Roman legionnaires, who, as most people I believe know, the Roman Empire was a hugely military entity, and one of the major jobs was of being a soldier. A legionnaire who was enrolled in the army, if that's the right way to say that. There were documents that stated that 75% of their daily rations that they would receive for being a legionnaire were carb-based, either from barley or from wheat. It was also known that the amount of work that legionnaires would do in a day would be equitable to a 5,000 calorie output, again, on the level of elite athletes of today's world. So therefore, a lot of the extremely active people in the past were heavily reliant on plant-based foods to receive their energy needs. In more modern terms, plant-based diets have been increasing in popularity for a number of years since, and to reflect that, since 2017, there has been a larger number of peer-reviewed studies that were done on that particular topic, the relationship between plant-based foods and their impact on athletic performance. Part of the reason for the increase in the popularity of plant-based diets was there are a number of health benefits that can result from partaking in it, as well as other people who may choose to do it for ethical reasons related to animal rights, animal cruelty, things of that nature, and environmental sustainability reasons, due to the fact that producing plant-based foods produces fewer greenhouse gases and is less hard on the ground where it is produced as compared to an animal raising production. Oh, sorry. Pardon me. Again, sorry, technology issues causing me some distress. All right, picking up where I left off, reasons for people choosing plant-based diets. One of the primary reasons is the health benefits that can be seen from those who have followed along with a plant-based diet regimen. Plant-based foods, as compared to animal products, tend to be much, much lower in saturated fat and higher in fiber and phytochemicals. That would lead to lower cholesterol and better serum glucose control. It's common knowledge in the nutrition world that a diet lower in saturated fat is good for your health, and fiber is helpful in controlling cholesterol levels, and phytochemicals, having all of their beneficial qualities, would of course hopefully lead to a better chance of reducing health conditions similar to what is listed on this slide. There were a number of conditions that I could have listed here, but for the sake of brevity, I only listed a few of the primary ones that were discussed. They are typically lessening in heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, certain varieties of cancers, and obesity can also be seen to be linked as an effect of adhering to a plant-based diet. Vegetarians appear to also have lower blood pressure and lower body mass index. The lower body mass index I will come back and talk about again in a little bit in relation to our athletic individuals. It should also be noted that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American Dietetic Association have released statements that are given in support of plant-based diets and the benefits, the health benefits that can be received from partaking in them. They recognize that they can be very much helpful in preventing the conditions that we've just discussed, as well as being a appropriate diet choice for anyone from any number of life stages, including pregnant women, athletes, young children, and anyone who would really care to be interested in doing it could receive the health benefits from plant-based diets. I did want to discuss a little bit the pros and cons that could be seen from an athlete partaking in a plant-based diet, because there's no 100% upside to anything, really, is there? Because plant-based diets are typically higher in carbs and antioxidants, it can be really good news for endurance athletes. As we know, as nutrition and dietetics professionals, carbs are the source, the primary energy source that we see in our bodies for being the source of energy that we need to survive. And as an athlete who is expending large quantities of energy, having an increased supply of carbs in their diet would help fuel their higher intensity exercise. As for being higher in antioxidants, it's been shown that antioxidants help to reduce oxidative stress, which can be induced by engaging in high intensity exercises. Oxidative stress can lead to soreness in your muscles. It can lead to inflammation. And again, antioxidants can help counteract that and see better results from engaging in a plant-based diet. As was stated on the previous slide, that a plant-based diet can lower a body mass index. Many performance in a lot of different areas of athletics can be improved by having a lessened weight and a lessened BMI. Therefore, it improves stamina and again leads to a enhanced performance on the athlete's part. The cons of a plant-based diet, though, this was stated in both of those releases that I mentioned before from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American Dietetic Association, that people who do not appropriately plan their plant-based diet can see deficiencies in their nutrient makeup. Most commonly in the realms of protein, vitamin B12, calcium, things of that nature. If they're not eating the right variety or enough diversity or the right amount of certain kinds of foods, then they can be lacking in those particular nutrients. On another note, the micronutrients iron and zinc, minerals for us, both of those, when they come in plant-based sources, they are typically less bioavailable. And what that means is that the body has more trouble absorbing them and using them. So a plant-based dieter would need to consider taking supplementation to ensure that they are getting all of the nutrients that they need in any given day. All right, now that we've talked about the pros and cons, I'd like to lay some statistics for you regarding plant-based diets. It should be noted that in 2019, the International Food Information Council named veganism and plant-based diet trends as one of the top 5 trends to watch. And that was based on the fact that there was a 20% increase in plant-based food product sales over the course of the last several years. So it was named as a very popular and up and coming trend. Between the years of 2014 and 2017, there was a 600% increase in the number of United States consumers who identified themselves as vegan. And again, that's just vegan, not just vegetarian, but vegan, the most stringent of all of our plant-based diets. Yeah, it increased actually from 1% to 6%, giving us that 600% increase. So even though that's not an extremely large percentage of the population, it is a significant jump. So that is something to keep an eye on that may continue in that trend, and we may see more and more people continuing onward to be choosing a plant-based lifestyle. It was also shown that in 2017, there was a 17% increase in plant-based food alternatives. So more and more things were on the stores of grocery shelves that would fit into a plant-based dieter's food budget, if that's what you want to call it, meaning there were more varieties of almond milk, oat milk, egg alternatives, cheese alternatives, a variety of things of that nature. It would stand to reason that if the number of the general population who was choosing veganism or plant-based diets was increasing, it would also show that the number of athletes who were choosing to be plant-based would also increase as well. A study that had recognized that fact was particularly designed to see what was the prevalence of athletes who were choosing to become a plant-based person, and not only the prevalence of it, but also the impact that choosing a plant-based diet would have on their performance values, showing up in the events that they were registered for. The study is listed just there. It's the Nutrition and Running High Mileage, the NURMI study, if you prefer. And ultimately, there were 2,959 participants who gave their data to this study and had their results recorded. And it showed that there were 35% of those people were vegans, 21% of them were vegetarians, and 44% of them were omnivores. So the majority does still show that omnivores compared to the other two are outranking, but vegetarians and vegans together do combine for more numbers than the omnivores. It was also noted that the running high mileage study was for people who were endurance type athletes, going long distances, not just someone who was taking a little run around the block. So it's people who are significant athletes who were included in this study. All right, now that we're getting closer to actually talking about the studies that I've included in my systematic review, I'd like to go over a few definitions that will be important for you to understand as we're going through the data that was collected. VO2 max is something you're going to hear me say quite a bit. It refers to maximal oxygen uptake. This is the measure of how much oxygen can be delivered to the muscles, and it helps to set the upper limit for endurance performance. Really, what this means is that the higher a VO2 max is for an individual, the more energy they can produce, and therefore more work is done. So if you've got a higher VO2 max, you're typically going to be capable of performing at a higher level. It should be noted that VO2 max is considered one of the gold standards measures for overall fitness. Another definition we're going to talk about is the 1 rep maximum test. This is more in the realm of strength versus endurance. However, it is also considered a gold standard test for assessing the strength capacity that an individual possesses. The way that this test gets performed is they are looking at how much weight can an individual lift with only 1 repetition using correct technique for whatever move it is they're deciding to do. So how much weight in 1 good go can they lift? Just that once. Another definition related to the strength studies that we're going to look at is torque. One of the studies utilized how much torque was able to be performed by the athletes in the tests that they did. Torque is a measure of how much force acting on an object causes that object to rotate. Now, that is a very physics definition. And ultimately, what it means is that the more torque something produces, the greater its ability is to perform work. So the stronger a person is, the more torque they're going to have. So if with a measure of torque, the higher their torque, the stronger they are. The final definition I need to relay to you is regarding carnosine. Carnosine is a dipeptide that is stored in skeletal muscle that is synthesized from beta-alanine. Beta-alanine would be important in a little bit, but I'll come back to that. When there is a large quantity of carnosine possessed in skeletal muscles, it reduces the lactic acid accumulation that builds up over the course of exercise. There is a nice little flow chart given there for you guys that as glucose breaks down, and again, glucose is stored energy in our muscles. As that breaks down, because when we're exercising, we need energy, lactic acid gets produced. When there's a higher concentration of lactic acid, our muscles get more fatigued, they start to burn, and it reduces the muscle's ability to contract. So when there is more carnosine present there, it counteracts the lactic acid and acts as a buffer, thus leading to an improved amount of performance for the athletes who have their higher carnosine content. So those are the major definitions that we want to be aware of for these studies that we're going to get into. All right, so at last we're getting into the bulk of this presentation with our purpose statement. My purpose is to assess whether plant-based diets have a positive influence on sports performance via endurance and strength tests and muscular carnosine levels. Now, again, the reason why this is so important is because of the rise in the popularity that we've seen from plant-based dieters. And those who are going to adhere to it will need to be aware of the nutritional needs that they have, and we need to confirm that the plant-based diet is actually doing what we think it can do before we advise people to go ahead and adhere to that diet to try and get results that may not even be accurate. So we're going to look and see at how this all pans out for our studies. All right, my methodology here. The databases that I searched were EBSCO, CINAHL, PubMed Central, and PubMed with EIU electronic journals, as well as Google Scholar. I do want you to note that I did not really find any articles that were of help in CINAHL, but I wanted to tell you that I did, expand my search and covered as many bases as I could. The keywords that I started off with in Boolean phrase searching, I would combine plant-based diet or vegan or vegetarian with athletic performance or sports performance in my initial searches, since again, that's what I was covering. I would change up the wording if I felt that I needed to athletes or sports or athletics, or I would do plant-based diet and athletic performance, plant-based diet and athletic performance and runners. I would change the combinations to make sure I was getting as many possible articles to be relevant in my search and include as many as I could in my systematic review. My inclusion criteria that I was looking for in my articles, I wanted articles that directly compared a plant-based diet to a mixed diet or an omnivorous diet. I also wanted those studies to be evaluating some variety of physical performance, whether it was an endurance measure, a strength measure, or as I eventually found, a carnosine muscle content measure. The exclusions that were eventually pushed out of the way that would eliminate studies from my systematic review is if they were looking at the health status of the participants of the study. So did they have better cholesterol? Did they have better blood sugar? Did they have appropriate protein content, carbohydrate content, fat content? And that wasn't what I was looking for. I wanted to see how were the participants performing, not just what their health status was. I came across a number of studies that were comparing animal versus plant-based supplements, but they were doing the supplements in addition to an omnivorous diet. So again, there was, in my opinion, contamination from the omnivorous diet and the plant-based diet. If you were wanting to directly see how did the plant-based diet affect performance, I couldn't use those, so those got excluded. I also came across a number of studies that had co-occurring conditions included in the study. So what was the effect of athletes and plant-based diets if they have diabetes or if they had high blood pressure? I wanted healthy individuals to see what would be the result of if they included a plant-based diet, what would their performance be if they were at the optimum degree of health. The filters that I put into place when searching for my articles was it had to be a full text article. I needed to be able to read the whole thing. It had to come from a peer-reviewed journal that was written prior to 2011. It had to be in English. I would love to see what was done internationally, however, not have the capability to read those in another language. And then I did need to make a note about the changes that I made for Google Scholar. Google Scholar yielded an extremely high amount of sources that I would have had to sift through in the tens of thousands whenever I first put in my Boolean search phrases. So I had to limit it only to the most recent of articles, so anything written after 2020, and then I had to limit my phrases to be exactly what I wanted, the impact of a plant-based diet on VO2 max, or the impact of a plant-based diet on resistance strength compared to omnivore diet. It was using those phrases that I was able to get the amount of results down into something that I was reasonably able to sift through and look for sources that would work for my systematic review. Coming up here is the flow diagram of the study selection that I had. Of all the databases that I searched, when I initially put in my Boolean phrases, I got 4,338 studies. And after applying my exclusion criteria being full text, 2011, English, full text, I think I said that twice, I apologize, but I was left with 193 articles. Of those 193 articles, after screening the titles and the abstracts to make sure they were relevant for what I was looking for, I was able to exclude 171 articles and was left with 22 to read and in detail to see if they were going to be eligible for my criteria. Ultimately, there were several that did not match my criteria and several that were systematic reviews. And as I needed primary sources, I was not able to use those either. The 9 remaining studies that yielded from those 22 articles and the 4 systematic reviews, I looked through their references to see if there was anything I might have missed through my databases to see what I could utilize. And as a very last included study, I got a number of 10. So that is the number that you will be seeing me use in my systematic. All right, I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about the characteristics of the studies that were included in my systematic review. All of the studies together had a total of 653 participants, and I want to tell you about the people who were involved. So gender-wise, 4 out of the 10 studies that I used had matched gender numbers between the two groups that they were comparing to each other. The remainder of the studies was slightly skewed more towards women. They had a total of 191 men to 246 women. Really not a huge gap in my opinion. So there is a fairly equal distribution between men and women in these total studies. The age span for these study participants was anywhere between 16 to 68 years old. The majority of the studies did only include people between 18 and 35 years old. There was one study that went below 18 down to 16, and then I believe there was 2 or 3 studies that included people up to 68, and one that was actually focused on those who are around 48 years old. So mostly it was focused on young to maybe kind of middling aged people. So mostly young, healthy individuals included in this study. The levels of athleticism that were being looked at in this study. 2 of the studies were done on the general public who had a light intensity exercise. So maybe just everyday people who were moving around that are generally active but are not really putting forth too much effort, looking at those kinds of people. Majority of the studies focused on recreational or amateur runners. So someone who's more interested in athletic capability, maybe participates for fun in races or for running and cycling or swimming, things of that nature. Those were included in 6 of my studies. The last 2 of my studies that were included did focus on elite endurance athletes, so high-level people who were running extremely long distance races or biking extremely long distances. And then one was focused on a level of Ironman athletes who, if you are unfamiliar with that term, it means they are in extremely long races where you have to swim, cycle, and run all in the same day. Generally, the distance ran is about a marathon distance, so about 26 miles. I couldn't tell you exactly what the distance is for the swimming and the biking, but it's not unusual for it to take a lot of hours for someone to get through an Ironman race. The comparison groups. I wanted, since we had established that there was a large variety of plant-based diets out there, I wanted to specifically tell you which kinds of diets were being compared to each other in these studies. 3 of my studies were comparing vegetarians to omnivores, so there was some plant-based, there was some animal-based products being included with the vegetarians. 4 of my studies were comparing vegans to omnivores, so straight up plants to, yes, including animals. And then 2 of my studies compared all 3 groups. They compared vegans to lacto-ovo-vegetarians to omnivores. And finally, even though this tended to be a little bit outside of my parameters, one of my studies did compare the amount of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein in the same person. So individuals who included more plant-based protein in their diet, what was their performance like compared to those who were utilizing more animal-based protein? I also wanted to discuss with you that the length of time that people would adhere to these studies. Studies that were outside of my year range of prior to 2011, I had noticed a lot of them were using the technique of just having omnivores switch to a plant-based diet for the duration of the study. And I thought that was a little odd, as I had read in various other places that the adhering to the diet up until that point, they may still be utilizing nutrients from their omnivore diet days in the performance of whatever study it was that they were doing. So the studies that I found, a lot of them, and I really did like this, they utilized habitual plant-based dieters to habitual omnivores, meaning they had been on these diets for a significant length of time. I believe the shortest length of time that was included in one of those studies was they had been a plant-based diet for at least 3 months, if not for longer than that. A lot of them had been plant-based diet for a number of years, as compared to someone who only switched for the duration of that study. Now, 3 of my studies did not specify a length of time. 2 of them only followed the diet for the duration of the study. However, like I said, half of my studies, 5 of them, were habitual plant-based dieters versus habitual omnivores. All right, so now we're getting into the different sections of my systematic review. There were 3 primary measures that were going on. Like I said, endurance, strength, and carnosine. This section right here is going to focus on the 8 studies that evaluated the impact of plant-based diets on endurance. As I said back in the definitions, what was being tested, primarily 6 of the 8 studies measured VO2 max. The other 2 that did not use VO2 max, one of them utilized power related to body weight as their unit of measure, and the final study utilized the distance walked in a set amount of time to be able to evaluate their amount of performance. The methods that were being utilized in these studies, most of them used either a treadmill test or a cycle ergometer test to evaluate the VO2 max. A cycle ergometer basically measures the amount of power. It's a technology-based device that is able to measure the input that is being given from the person who is operating it. So 3 of my studies used the cycle. 3 of my studies used treadmill tests. One of them, it was just a basic time to exhaustion test that they were able to do. And then the other 2 treadmill test studies used ergometric tests, which is a relation of how the lungs correlate with the respiratory system, with the circulatory system, with the metabolic system. So it was comparing all these different systems together to evaluate VO2 max. The test that, one of the tests used the Harvard step test, which should be noted is able to be correlated to VO2 max. So it was included in one of the 6 studies that were measuring it. Even though it wasn't directly measuring VO2 max, the methods that they utilized in order to do it are able to be comparable as if they had been using VO2 max measures. And then the final one, they utilized the 6-minute walking test, which was a measure of how far could somebody walk in distance-wise in 6 minutes. All right, so for the findings of the endurance tests, 6 out of the 8 studies that measured VO2 max found that it was improved by those who were on a plant-based diet. I find that to be highly encouraging and indicating of the impact that a plant-based diet can have on athletic performance. As we said, VO2 max is one of the gold standard measures for being able to determine someone's athletic capability. So 6 out of 8 found that it was not just the same, but improved as compared to someone who is on an omnivore diet. In the 6-minute walking test, this was the study that I mentioned earlier that was comparing the amount of plant-based protein to animal-based protein in the same person. However, it was found that those who were taking in a higher proportion of plant-based protein in their daily diet were having a more improved performance as compared to those who did not. The same was not said to be true for animal protein. And it should also be noted that the association of the increased performance of those with plant-based diets, it persisted after adjusting for a number of different confounders. So it is noted that it is a significant factor in improving their performance. Excuse me. There was one study that found that there was no difference in performance between the groups. Not one was better than the other. I did want to note, though, it was the study that used power based on body weight instead of using VO2 max. And I think that may have been the defining factor as to why they didn't feel that it performed nearly as well, because they were not measuring actually VO2 max. Additional findings that I thought were of note to give to you, VO2 max was typically found to be improved. However, absolute volume oxygen was comparable between the two comparison groups, as was peak power output. Both of those things were found to be similar between omnivores and plant-based dieters. All right, now moving on to our strength-based studies. 3 of these studies evaluated the impact of plant-based diets. Now you're probably doing the math here and saying there were 8 studies that were included in endurance and 3 studies that were included in the strength, but there were only 10 studies included. 2 of the studies that I picked out were comparing both. They looked at both endurance and strength studies. I just was separating them into individual categories to make it a little bit flow better. All right, what was tested with our strength studies? Peak torque. Torque, again, is the amount of force that is enacted on an object. That's a measure of strength. They looked at both upper body muscle strength and lower body muscle strength. There were 2 studies that looked at the lower body and only 1 that looked at just the upper body. The methods that they utilized to test those areas of interest. The torque study utilized leg extensions. So how much pressure were they able to exert to get their leg extended? And then the other 2 studies utilized the 1 rep maximum test for chest presses to gauge upper body strength. And then the 2 studies that were focusing on legs used the 1 rep max in a variety of leg press. I did also want to note that the 1 study that was focusing on lower body mass did have the participants go through a 12-week resistance training program to see if that would have an influence on what they were able to do over that course in time. So not only were they looking at plant-based versus animal-based, they were looking at a training program to enhance athletic capability. Right, the findings of the strength-based studies. As compared to the endurance studies that did find significant differences between plant-based and animal-based groups, the strength studies did not really see any difference between the 2 comparisons. Peak torque did not differ for that first study. There was no significant difference between upper body and lower body strength for someone who was utilizing plant-based protein to someone who was utilizing animal-based protein. And in the final study, where the participants were involved in that 12-week training program, both groups did show a significant increase in lean muscle mass. So plant-based can be just as effective as animal-based as increasing lean muscle mass, but there was not a difference in the actual performance value. Not one group was better than the other in that frame of thought. All right, my final study, which measured muscle carnosine content. Again, carnosine, the higher content it have, the higher content it has in the muscles, the better the performance will be. So what was being tested? They tested the carnosine content in 3 of the skeletal muscles of the lower leg. They looked at the soleus, the gastrocnemius lateralis, and the tibialis anterior. They used biopsies and magnetic resonance spectroscopy to measure the content that was in each of those muscles. The magnetic resonance spectroscopy is a non-invasive test that is able to determine how much carnosine is the muscles by undergoing that magnetic resonance. The findings that came out of the carnosine study, they found that a plant-based diet non-significantly decreased the amount of carnosine that was found in the muscle, and an omnivore diet non-significantly increased the amount of carnosine. So obviously there were some differences that were included, but not enough of a difference for them to say that it was significant. And that was only actually in the soleus muscle. The content between the gastroc and the tibialis muscles were not shown to have been affected by the variances in diet. Additional findings that I wanted to share with you out of these studies, a lot of them evaluated biometric measures between the plant-based dieters and the omnivores. In a few studies, it was showed that vegans typically weighed less. Vegetarians tended to have a leaner body mass. Body mass index was lower in 3 of my studies, and then in 2 of the other studies that specifically stated it, the groups had a similar BMI. So on the average, I really didn't find too much that stated that omnivores were doing better than the plant-based dieters for the biometric measures. If anything, it was a continuing trend that if they were not exactly the same or similar to each other, that the vegans were having a leaner type of body or less weight or a lower BMI. So, and again, those kinds of parameters tend to enhance athletic performance, having that leaner body type. So that is something to take note of. In 2 specific tests, it should be noted, one of the tests also, or one of the studies, excuse me, also was measuring vegan heart morphology, meaning the shape and the function of the athlete's heart. And it was found that the structural makeup of the individual's hearts was better suited to endurance training than those who were on the omnivorous diet. So again, athletes' hearts better suited on a plant-based diet to doing what they wanted to do. In addition, the carnosine study that was done in conjunction with a 5 weeks of sprint training activity, if that's what you want to call it. And it was found that the diets did not have a significant effect on the carnosine content that was in the muscle. However, the training did have a significant impact and was able to improve the carnosine content. So that could be something to take note of, that while diet is not a huge factor in the amount of carnosine that is present, training and the physical effort that's put into it does have an impact on what is there. So ultimately, let me do a recap here. Regarding endurance, 7 out of the 8 studies were unified in their findings, finding that VO2 max was positively affected, or performance, if it was that one study that was not measuring VO2 max, it enhanced athletic performance as compared to an omnivore diet. I did want to note that the study that found no difference between groups was not measuring VO2 max, and they were measuring something else. So that can be a little bit of a limitation there, not being able to directly compare the results of the power of body weight versus the VO2 max. Regarding strength, 3 of 3 studies were unified in their findings, so everyone said the same thing, that strength was not negatively affected by a plant-based diet, even if it was not improved by it. So what you can draw from those conclusions is that a plant-based diet can be just as effective for anybody who wants to strength train, and there would not be any negative side effects, assuming that they were having an appropriately planned plant-based diet. In the level of carnosines, plant-based diets are lower in beta-alanine. I said I was going to come back to beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is primarily found in fish and meats as compared to plant-based foods, and beta-alanine is responsible, along with another amino acid, for synthesizing carnosine. Therefore, having a smaller amount of beta-alanine in your diet could negatively impact buffering capacity of a plant-based diet if they were adhered to for a significant length of time. That being said, plant-based dieters could take supplements of beta-alanine. However, if they were adhering to solely plant-based without any kind of supplementation, beta-alanine could be decreased, and therefore performance could also be decreased as well. Ultimately, 6 out of 10 studies found that plant-based diets were not detrimental or were capable of supporting an athletic lifestyle. 5 out of 10 studies found that plant-based diets improved performance. And again, that discrepancy there of 6 out of 5 and 6 out of 10 and 5 out of 10, that's because some of my studies were comparing more than two measures, endurance versus strength. All of the strength studies found that it was not detrimental, and a lot of the endurance studies found that it actually was an enhancement to athletic performance. And then finally, 2 out of 10 indicated that plant-based diets resulted in decreased performance. However, one of the studies found that VO2 max was higher, but their conclusion stated that having a higher VO2 max indicated a poorer exercise economy, which did not make sense to me, because when VO2 max is higher, performance is better. So I have a feeling that whoever wrote that study was mistaken in the way that they were interpreting their results, but the data did show that the results of their studies had a higher VO2 max. So really, it can almost be said that 7 out of 10 studies found that they were capable of supporting an athletics lifestyle. And then that final study indicated that carnosine was non-significantly decreased with a plant-based diet as compared to a animal-based one. And again, I kind of discussed the reasons for why that could be a problem on the previous slide. The effectiveness of plant-based diets on enhancing athletic performance. The American Dietetic Association and Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, I mentioned them twice already, I think, in this presentation. The statements that they had released in 2009 and in 2016 concur that plant-based diets are suitable for supporting athletic performance, any number of different lifestyle variations, pregnancy, athletics, and any number of things. It can be supported. So that supports my findings and my systematic research that it can be supportive of athletics, if not an enhancement to athletics. Then there were a variety of other systematic reviews and narrative reviews on this subject that I was able to come across in my search for my studies that published similar findings. They tended to state in their conclusions that at the very least, plant-based diets are not detrimental to athletic performance. That was Craddock, Lynch, and Wernitzer, though they did not go so far as to say that athletic performance could be improved. They did say that it was not detrimental. In my opinion, which populations would benefit based on the studies that I was able to include in my systematic review? Any number of athletic ability people could benefit from a plant-based diet. The diversity of athletic levels that was in my studies makes these results generalizable for a lot of different people. The age range, there was a bit of a lack there, as the majority of the studies included people between the ages of 18 and 35. They should be doing more research on those who are younger and those who are in an older variety of category to see if the results would be the same as compared to those who are young and partaking of a plant-based diet. Sorry for that interruption. Those kinds of athletes, it would depend on what category of performance they are looking for. Endurance athletes would probably receive a lot of benefits from a plant-based diet, whereas strength, it wouldn't really matter one way or the other if they wanted to go plant-based for the health benefits related to maintaining weight and lower blood pressure, etc., or if they wanted to go animal-based because there's not a performance indicator that is increasing or decreasing based on the choice that they would choose. The strengths and limitations of my study. Some of the strengths is that research is trending towards the topic. We said that the popularity of plant-based diets have been increasing since 2017. There's been more and more studies being produced, and that means that there's going to be a larger variety or a larger pool of data to pull from for those in the future. Many studies matched their control groups. They matched age, gender, activity levels, the numbers between men and women, and just the numbers in general, like a 35 group versus a 35 group. That was very matched all across the ways. So it was not an imbalance between the groups. There was a variation in activity levels, again, making it generalizable. Many studies also included habitual vegans, vegetarians, meaning that the stored nutrients in the body had time to take effect and would not have contaminated the results by having them switch from an omnivorous diet only for the duration of the study. Some of the limitations of this study is that there were only three strength studies that I was able to find. So again, this is a very small pool of data. There was only one carnosine study that I was able to find. So it's not an extremely large pool of evidence to pull from, whereas the results that I did find were encouraging to say that they could enhance endurance. It's not a significant enough amount, and that more research should be done in those areas to help confirm the results that I found. There was also variation in measurement methods, and so to have an equality and be able to do a direct comparison of measurement methods, that would be helpful as well. Finally, my implications and recommendations. The implications of this study are in conclusion with the other systematic reviews and the statements from the organizations responsible for nutritional health, that plant-based diets are capable of supporting athletic lifestyles and can contribute to improved physical performance for endurance athletes. It should be noted that athletes should follow recommendations for diet diversity in order to prevent lacking certain nutrients, the protein, the zinc, the calcium, the iron. They get enough diversity in there and they should be okay. Or if they include supplementation, they'll be all right. If they're not getting enough diversity, that could cause a problem. I already mentioned that more research should be done in order to confirm the effects on strength and muscle carnosine content due to the limited quantity of data. And for the nutrition professionals who may be witnessing this, due to the increasing popularity of plant-based diets in both the general public and the athletic population, they should become more familiar with the dietary needs of those who are seeking them, because it's our job to advise them and help to increase health to live a full and happy life. So that would be what can be inferred from the study and the recommendations that I would give to those who are seeking to switch to a plant-based diet. I believe that is everything that I needed to cover, and I hope that you enjoyed.